Good evening, everyone. It is
So you
4
can
p.m. and on behalf of Department of Obs and Gynae, Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute of Medical Sciences and Dr. RML Hospital, I welcome all delegates to the second AOGD meet of 2021. We have three interesting case presentations lined up. Rare cases which pose dilemma in diagnosis and management for us. It is great sharing our experience, and we would also welcome experiences of our senior colleagues of similar cases. Question can be put up in question and answer box and would be taken after the three presentations. At the outset, I now welcome Dr. Mala Srivastava, President AOGD, for her address, and Dr. Mamta Dagar for her secretary report.
Dr. Renuka. Good evening, everyone. I bring greetings from AOGD. It's my pleasure and privilege to be a part of this virtual AOGD monthly meet of Dr. RML Hospital. We are all benefiting and enjoying the richness of academics from a comfort zone of hospitals and home during this corona pandemic. But now we are planning one physical executive meeting at Auditorium of Sir Gangaram Hospital on 18th of Feb, 4 to 5 p.m. Though the monthly meeting for Feb is on 26th February at UCMS GTB Hospital, but we thought at least one physical executive meeting should be organized so that the important decisions can be resolved by consensus. Agenda of the executive meeting, I shall let know everyone well in time. Vaccines are in place and most of us are taking the advantage and benefits of the vaccine. I hope this corona pandemic goes away and we are happier again. I hand over the floor to Dr. Mamta to present the Secretary's report.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of AOGD, I welcome you all to this AOGD monthly clinical meeting, which is virtual, being organized by Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute of Medical Sciences, and Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia Hospital. I shall quickly go through the Secretary's report. As you know, today is the third last AOGD monthly clinical meeting of our tenure, and last one was organized by ESI Hospital on 1st January. And so far we had 4 virtual executive meetings, and we are planning a live meeting in the month of February as intimated by Dr. Mala. This is the list of AOGD events in the month of January since the last monthly clinical meeting. All were held virtually. As you see, on 4th January, there was a webinar on an update on vulvovaginal health by Multidisciplinary Committee of AOGD. On 5th January, there was a webinar on understanding and treating adenomyosis by AOGD Endoscopy Committee and Multidisciplinary Committee of AOGD. 6th January, a webinar was conducted on critical nutrition and pregnancy and Pearl's wisdom, how to stay healthy and happy in 2021 by FOGSD in association with AOGD, NARCHI Delhi and ISCCP. On 9th January, there was a webinar on role of low-dose mifepristone in uterine leiomyoma and endocrinologist perspective in PCOS by AOGD Reproductive Endocrinology Committee. On 14th January, there were FAQs on endometriosis under the aegis of AOGD. There are series of FAQs which are being organized by AOGD in association with Omnicuris. On 15th January, FAQs on AUB under the aegis of AOGD. On 16th January, FAQs on breast cancer. On 17th January, a webinar on management of threatened miscarriage and thin endometrium, where are we today, by AOGD Infertility Committee in association with Delhi ESAR. On 18th January, FAQs on small babies and fetal growth restriction. 22nd January, webinar on medical management of endometriosis, which drug is better, and myoinositol in PCOS by AOGD Infertility Committee. On 23rd January, there was a CME on cervical cancer prevention organized by Institute of Obs and Gynae, Sir Gangaram Hospital in association with the Oncology Subcommittee of AOGD. On 25th January, there was again a webinar on oncology by Rajiv Gandhi Cancer Institute and Research Center, Niti Bagh, South Delhi, in association with the FOGST under aegis of AOGD, NARCHI, FOXY, ISCCP, and Oncology Committee of AOGD. Today, that is on 29th, again, there is a Pan-India Endometriosis Symposium, which is being organized by FOXY Endometriosis Committee in collaboration with Delhi and UK societies. And there is a Urogyne Masterclass webinar organized by Urogyne Committee, AOGD and FOXY from 5 to 7 p.m. Amongst the forthcoming AOGD events, these are the events which are known so far. On 1st February, we are going to have FAQs on diabetes in pregnancy under the aegis of AOGD. On 2nd February, webinar on recurrent hydrops fetalis under the aegis of Fetal Medicine and Safe Motherhood Subcommittee of AOGD. From 5th to 7th February, there are virtual Gurukul classes which are organized by Institute of Obs and Gynae, Sir Gangaram Hospital under the aegis of ISOPAB and AOGD. There are limited seats available for postgraduates, both DNB and MD candidates. All these postgraduates can apply and registration is free but mandatory. On 17th February, there are FAQs on fibroid uterus. And the next monthly clinical meeting we are going to have on 26th February, which will be organized by UCMS and GTB Hospital. Thank you so much. And now I hand over to Dr. Renuka Malik for further proceedings. Over to you, Dr. Renuka.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mamta. This webinar is made possible by the educational grant from Jackson Pal. A short video clip of their product follows. Now I request Dr. Ashok Kumar, our HOD, to welcome and to start the scientific proceedings.
Thank you, Dr. Renuka. Good evening to all my seniors and friends, patrons of AOGD, President Dr. Mala Srivastav, Secretary and Office Bearers of AOGD, and all seniors from all the medical college and from the practice of Delhi and nearby states. Dr. Rashmi Vyas is from Noida, is with us. And I welcome Dr. Kamal Bakshi. Madam, thank you for joining. Today we are presenting 3 cases, and these 3 cases are unique in nature, rare. That is why it has been decided to present these cases. And first case will be presented by Dr. Neha Pruthi Tandon. She is assistant professor in the department, and Dr. Manmeet Kaur Maan. She is senior resident in the department. The second case will be on thoracic endometriosis syndrome, and Dr. Abha Kiran, who is the senior resident, and Dr. Alka Goel, she is the senior consultant in the department. The third case is tubocutaneous fistula. This will be presented by Dr. Paridhi Gupta. She is postgraduate student, and Dr. Anju Mara, she is associate professor in the department. So without wasting any time, we start with the proceeding. And I invite Dr. Manmeet Kaur Maan to start the presentation on the case of bilateral large vulval elephantiasis. So Dr. Manmeet.
Good evening, everyone. I'm presenting the case on bilateral large vulval elephantiasis. Mrs. X, 25 years old, illiterate, para 1 live 1, resident of Atwaria village, Madhubani district, Bihar, presented to Gynae OPD on 6th of January 2020 with chief complaints of a huge swelling over the vulval region since 3 years. Swelling initially involved the right labia majora and gradually increased in size to the present stage involving whole of the vulval region. She had associated complaints of dyspareunia, difficulty in walking due to the huge mass, There were no urinary complaints, no discharge per vaginum, no history of trauma or any prior genital surgery. She had regular menses occurring every 28 days, lasting for 3 to 5 days with no dysmenorrhea or clots. Patient was not able to maintain her menstrual hygiene properly due to the huge mass obliterating the vulval cleft. She was para 1 live 1 with full-term normal vaginal delivery at home 1 year back with a healthy male child of 2.5 kg. Patient had history of pulmonary tuberculosis in childhood for which she has taken ATT for 6 months. Otherwise, there was no history of fever, swelling, or lymphadenopathy in the past. Patient had no family history of tuberculosis or malignancy. She was vegetarian, non-alcoholic, non-smoker with good bowel and bladder habits. She belonged to the lower class and husband was laborer by occupation. Patient had daily dietary intake of 2000 kilocalories per day. On examination, patient was thin built with BMI of 20 kg per meter square. Her vitals were normal. She was afebrile. She had no pallor, icterus, cyanosis, thyromegaly, or any scars and sinuses. Cervical, axillary, supraclavicular, inguinal, or femoral lymph nodes were not palpable, and there was no evidence of edema over the limbs. On local examination, as we can see in this picture, there was a huge growth measuring 20 into 14 into 11 centimeters, involving both the labia majora and minora, obstructing the vulval cleft. The swelling was non-tender, non-ulcerative, with bossulated surface showing hyperkeratosis with wart-like protuberances. The swelling was firm to hard in consistency. Her routine investigation was normal, no eosinophilia was visible. In specific investigations, her Montus test was negative, ESR and chest X-ray were normal, ruling out tuberculosis. A night blood sample was negative for microfilaria antigen of Wucheria bancrofti, and a carbamazine provocation test done during day 2 was negative for the microfilaria. Patient was treated with diethyl carbamazine in the dose of 600 per kg per day in 3 divided doses given for 12 days, followed which patient was planned for the surgery. In surgery, excision of the lump avoiding the urethra and clitoris, followed by vulval reconstruction, was done under regional anesthesia on 14th of February 2020. Mass excised was sent for histopathological examination. Post-operative period was uneventful, and patient was discharged on post-op day 10 in satisfactory condition. On the cross-examination, there was a large mass of 20 into 14 into 11 centimeters with surface showing varied size of hard wart-like protuberances as shown in the picture. On cut section, there was a homogeneous gray-white area with lymph seen oozing out. This is the figure showing reconstructed vulva in the immediate post-operative period. The histopathological report, it showed the hyperkeratosis and acanthosis with subepithelium showing many dilated lymphatics as in the second picture, surrounded by ill-defined collection of histiocytes, epithelioid cell non-caseating granuloma, along with the perilymphatic fibrosis. AFB and fungal staining were negative. Findings were suggestive of filariasis. Based upon the clinical history and investigations, 2 diagnoses of tuberculosis and filariasis were made. For tuberculosis, Montus test, chest X-ray, and histopathology, which was suggestive of non-caseating granulomas with absence of acid fast bacilli, it ruled out tuberculosis. For filariasis, the points in favor were the patient was resident of Hatvaria village, Madhubani district, Bihar, which had the highest density of 17% all over India, and histopathological features, they were consistent with filariasis. Although the circulating filarial antigen detection test was negative in our case, for this test, it is a very sensitive test in acute cases, but can be negative in chronic cases, as was in our case. Now, I invite Dr. Neha ma'am to take over for discussion part.
Good afternoon, everyone. We begin with the discussion of the first stage. The term elephantiasis is not new and has been used by Roman encyclopedists since 30 BC to describe elephant-like appearance of massively enlarged lower limb. Presently, it is used to describe enlargement of any body part, upper limb, breast, scrotum, or female genitalia. Vulval elephantiasis represents a rare form of localized chronic lymphedema, which accounts for less than 1% of the total total elephantiasis cases. Irrespective of the etiology, the basic process remains the same. There is permanent obstruction of the lymphatic channels, which leads to lymphatic stasis. Thereafter, there is accumulation of fibroblasts, adipocytes, and keratinocytes, which leads to hard fibrotic tissue and thickened skin, and hence the term elephantiasis is used. The causes of lymphedema can be primary and secondary. The primary are the one in which the cause is not exactly known and have been categorized according to the age group. In less than 2 years of age, it is congenital lymphedema. In 2 to 35 years, it is lymphedema precox. In more than 35, it is lymphedema tarda. The secondary causes can be infective and non-infective. Amongst the infective, filariasis and tuberculosis are the most common causes, followed by lymphogranuloma delirium and donovenosis. The non-infective causes include genital malignancies, metastatic Crohn's disease, genital radiation trauma, all those conditions in which there is involvement of lymphatics and lymph nodes of the genital region. This slide shows the early stages of the infective form of lymphedema. In tuberculosis, in the early stages, there is going to be ulcers, sinuses, and later on it leads to scarring, and the later stages there can be chronic elephantiasis. In LGV, there are going to be enlarged lymph nodes along with concomitant ulcers. Donovenosis have ulcers with a specific beefy margins which can differentiate them. In filariasis, earlier there is going to be soft fitting edema, and later on it leads to hard fibrotic skin. Although condyloma acuminata is not caused by obstruction of lymphatics, it is caused by human papilloma virus, which basically affects the epithelium of the skin. This has a warty growth, which is different from the elephantiasis due to filariasis and tuberculosis. This also has to be differentiated. This is the chart which I've already described. Filariasis is the world's second leading cause of long-term disability. In India, 40% of the total cases of the world are there of filariasis. 95% of the cases in India are recorded in Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and along the coastline as shown in the map. In lymphatic filariasis is the common cause of lymphedema, mostly affecting lower organs. Filarial elephantiasis of the vulva in females accounts for only 1 to 2% of the total lymphedema cases. It poses a physical and mental burden not only to the patient but also to the entire family. Lymphatic filariasis is caused 99% by Wucheria bancrofti and transmitted by Culex, and rarely by Brugia mannii. The life cycle is very interesting. The infected mosquito bites the human skin, and the L3 larvae are deposited there. They then travel to the lymph vessels and grow into adult worms in about 6 months. The adult worms reside in the afferent lymphatic system for about 5 to 8 years and a maximum of 15 years. They keep on producing microfilaria, but these microfilaria are the sheath form and cannot infect the person. However, when the microfilaria, the microfilaria in the blood, it is a source of infection to the others. So when the mosquito bites these infected human beings, it gets the microfilaria, and this microfilaria further grows to L3 forms inside the mosquito, and this mosquito again becomes infected. As long as the adult worm lives, the lymphatic remain patent. Once it dies, there is progressive fibrosis, extensive perilymphangitis, leading to irreversible damage to the lymphatics and chronic sequelae. This is the reason that neither the adult worm nor the microfilaria are demonstrated in the body. Majority of the patients are asymptomatic and do not show any external signs of infection. However, there can be acute episodes with high-grade fever with chills, body ache, pain and redness in the affected body parts, and swollen lymph nodes. The chronic forms present as lymphedema and skin thickening. Chronic manifestations basically are irreversible damage to the lymphatic system. The diagnosis of vulval filariasis at most of the time is clinical, as neither the microfilaria are seen on the peripheral smear nor the filarial worm are demonstrated in the tissue section. Circulating filarial antigen detection test, although the gold standard to diagnose Wucheria bancrofti, is usually seen positive in the acute cases, and so is eosinophilia seen in acute cases. Coming on to the management, the early stages can be managed with good compression therapy and garments. Acute inflammatory episodes require proper hygiene, skincare, and exercise in case there is lower limb involvement. Management of superadded bacterial infections has to be done. Medical treatment is to be given to those who demonstrate positive antigen test. A single dose of Albendazole plus diethyl carbamazine is given, or we can give diethyl carbamazine alone for 12 days. The people with lymphedema and elephantiasis are unlikely to benefit from the medical management. Usually, they require surgery to alleviate the symptoms. A multidisciplinary team of gynecologists, dermatologists, and surgeon is required to manage these patients. Basic aim is to reduce the swelling, to restore the normal shape and sexual function, and to prevent the inflammatory episodes. Excision of the skin and subcutaneous tissue of the involved part and closing the defect with the adjacent normal skin is the mainstay of treatment. If the defect is very large, in that case, grafts and medial thigh flaps can be used. Government of India has been working to eliminate filariasis. National Filaria Control Program was launched in 1955. Although when it was realized in 1960, it was found to be a failure due to community non-cooperation and ineffectiveness of insecticide indoor spray. India has missed 4 major deadlines to eliminate lymphatic filariasis, and presently the deadline is postponed till 2021. Global Alliance to Eliminate Lymphatic Filariasis has been formed in 2000 with a twin pillar strategy of mass drug administration and morbidity management and disability prevention. The mass drug administration began in 2004. Initially, a single dose of diethyl carbamazine was given. But presently, from 2018, triple drug therapy in which diethyl carbamazine, albendazole, and ivermectin is given to all the people in the endemic area, except for the pregnant women, children less than 2 years of age, and sick people. We analyzed the data over the last 10 years and we found 8 cases of vulval elephantiasis. 6 cases were due to filariasis and 2 cases were due to tuberculosis. We went into the in-depth study and we found that the mainstay management for these patients is excision and vulval reconstruction. We further analyzed other data also, and we found that the older data revealed that there were 2 cases of donovenosis and 1 case of LGV, in which also excision and vulval reconstruction was done. So the take-home message is, early diagnosis and treatment can avoid debilitating condition, which can have severe impact on the social life of the patient. The aim is to create much awareness so that no patient reaches the chronic phase of the disease. Implementation of the national program along with community participation can help in eliminating lymphatic filariasis. Surgery is the ultimate treatment option irrespective of the cause. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm presenting a rare case of thoracic endometriosis syndrome. Mrs. X, 33 years, para 1 live 1, referred to gynae OPD with a complaint of chronic pelvic pain for past 7 years, recurrent right-sided chest heaviness for past 2 years. Pain in lower abdomen was dull, aching, continuous, worsening 2 days prior to menses, radiating to back and lower limbs, and was not relieved on rest or medication. Right-sided heaviness in chest was episodic, starting 2 days prior to menses and resolved in 3 to 4 days. 6 months back, she had a shortness of breath for which she visited medicine OPD. There was no history of fever, cough, chest pain, or paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea. Other history were insignificant. 6 years back, she consulted a government hospital for the complaint of infertility and pain abdomen. On evaluation, there was normal abdominal and pelvic organ and gross ascites on ultrasound. Category 1 ATT was started for 9 months empirically. There was a resolution of ascites, but the pain persisted. 3 years later, she visited a private practitioner for the persistence of pain and secondary infertility. Again, on ultrasound, there was recurrence of ascites. She was started on category 2 ATT for 9 months empirically. On both the occasions, ascitic fluid tap was not done. PCR for menstrual blood was negative. 6 months back, she had shortness of breath for which she was admitted in medicine OPD. She was admitted twice with the diagnosis of right-sided hydropneumothorax. Intercostal drain was transudate hemorrhagic and was negative for TB PCR, negative for malignant cells on cytology, and had normal ADA levels. CECT chest showed ground glass opacities on right-sided lower and middle lobe and mild pleural effusion. CECT abdomen showed normal abdomen and pelvic organs with mild ascites. Thoracoscopy was done by respiratory physician. Pleural fluid was blood stained, and there were blebs on the costal pleura, adhesions on the costal, diaphragmatic, and mediastinal pleura, from where biopsy were taken. Yellow deposits were present on the visceral pleura. Histopathological examination showed hemosiderin-laden macrophages and hemosiderin pigment. Pulse stain for iron was positive. At this point, she was referred to gynae OPD to rule out pelvic endometriosis. She had dysmenorrhea since menarche. She was married twice. From first marriage, she has a child of 17 years. And after the demise of her first husband, she was remarried 9 years back and was unable to conceive despite cohabitation. Rest history insignificant. On general examination, it was normal. On auscultation, there was decreased air entry on the right side. Intercostal drain in situ was draining hemorrhagic fluid. Per speculum examination showed old heat cervical tears at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. There was no discharge. Per vaginum showed normal uterus with restricted mobility. Left adnexa was palpable and tender. Right fornix was free. Pouch of Douglas had tender nodularity, and bilateral uterosacrals were thickened and tender. Her routine investigations, CA-125, pap smear, and endometrial biopsy were normal. Ultrasound abdomen and pelvis showed mild ascites. Right ovary was closely abutting the uterus. Left ovary was not seen separately, and there was increased vascularity of the adnexa and pelvic structure. A provisional diagnosis of 33-year para-1 live 1 with secondary infertility with chronic pelvic pain and thoracic endometriosis syndrome was made. Features which favored the diagnosis of thoracic endometriosis were young age, infertility, per vaginum findings consisting with the finding of pelvic endometriosis, right-sided thoracic lesion, temporal association with menstrual cycle, and recurrence of disease. Patient was offered ablation of pleural lesion followed by IVF conception. Meanwhile, tablet Dynogest 2 mg once daily dose was started. But due to financial issues and risk of recurrence after conservative management, and she just wanted to get relieved of the pain and was no longer wanted to conceive, she opted for a definitive treatment. Total abdominal hysterectomy with bilateral salpingo-uprectomy was done. On laparotomy, small bowel was densely adherent to anterior abdominal wall from left hemidiaphragm to the level of umbilicus. 50 ml of hemorrhagic fluid was present, which was sent for cytology and TB-PCR. Uterus was normal in size, fixed to pouch of Douglas, and could not be delivered out. Bilateral tubes and ovaries were densely adherent to bowels and posterior surface of the uterus and to the pelvic peritoneum posteriorly. Sigmoid colon was adherent to left uterosacral ligament and posterior surface of uterus. Left ureter was adherent to left uterosacral ligament. Small bluish lesion, 0.5 cm size, was seen in the rectovaginal septum after dissection of sigmoid colon, which was sent for biopsy. An impression of stage 4 abdominopelvic endometriosis was made. Peritoneal fluid sent was negative for TB-PCR, and there were no malignant cells on cytology. Histopathological examination of the specimen showed normal endometrium and myometrium. Bilateral ovary showed endometrial glands, stroma, and hemosiderin-laden macrophages. Bilateral tubes were unremarkable. Rectovaginal fossa tissue showed ovarian parenchymal tissue with large intervening areas of hemorrhage. There were no endometrial glands. Thoracic endometriosis syndrome refers to endometrial-like glands and stroma within lungs, parenchyma, pleural surface, or bronchopulmonary segment, or any combination of these. Parenchymal lesions are asymptomatic and they are found as a ground glass opacities on imaging. Diaphragmatic lesions are asymptomatic and may be found as catamenial pain in neck, shoulder, or right hemidiaphragm if phrenic nerve is involved. Pleural lesion mostly present as a catamenial pneumothorax and less commonly as a catamenial hemothorax. Bronchopulmonary lesion presents as a catamenial hemoptysis. Approximately 84% have concomitant pelvic endometriosis. Diagnostic tests which help in thoracic endometriosis are chest X-ray to pick up pneumo and hemothorax. HRCT is investigation of choice for parenchymal lesions. Diaphragmatic endometriosis are best diagnosed on MRI. Gold standard for definitive diagnosis are video-assisted thoracoscopic surgeries. These are ideal during menses and most commonly reported intra-op findings on VATS are red lesion, blue lesion, fibrosis, diaphragmatic fenestration. Patients are young, so first line is medical management. GnRH analogs are the drug of choice. Unfortunately, the risk of recurrence after discontinued medical management is very high. Surgical management is multidisciplinary and are for refractive and recurrent diseases. VATS along with video laparoscopy and laparotomy be done to excise endometrial lesions. Superficial implants are fulgurated. Deeper implants and parenchymal nodules are excised. Diaphragmatic lesions are excised and repair of diaphragmatic defect is done to reduce the risk of recurrence. It has been seen that fluorodesis along with VATS decreases the risk of recurrence by 20 to 25%. Disadvantages of VATS are long recovery time and postoperative pain. Definitive management is bilateral salpingo-uprectomy. I would like to invite Dr. Alka for further insight into the topic.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would just like to wind up this case by emphasizing that endometriosis has been reported in virtually every organ of female human body and even in the men. Most of us have removed endometriosis from abdominal wall, particularly from cesarean scars. In the umbilicus, it can also occur as a primary lesion. Besides the abdominal wall and thorax, cases have been reported in inguinal canal, retroperitoneal nerves, various abdominal organs like liver, kidney, pancreas, appendix, breast, brain, eyelid, and even nasal mucosa. The extragenital lesion is the most common extragenital site. Gastrointestinal lesion is the most common extragenital site. Symptoms vary according to the location. Therefore, the take-home message for today is that any symptom which aggravates or starts 24 hours prior to or within 72 hours of onset of menstruation should be investigated for endometriosis. Thank you very much. I would like to hand over to Dr. Paridhi for the next case.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am presenting a case on tuberculosis fistula. A 38-year-old female, para 3 life with previous 3 cesareans, referred from Government Hospital UP with complaints of persistent discharge from left inguinal region since 1.5 years. Discharge was serious in nature but gets blood stain during menses. It was also associated with intermittent pain abdomen. There was no history of fever, dysmenorrhea, or dyspareunia. She also has a history of similar discharge from right inguinal region, which resolves on its own by after taking ATT for 6 months. The patient was apparently all right 1.5 years back when she noticed bilateral painless inguinal swelling, which burst on its own, resulting in bilateral discharge. Ultrasound and CT scan was done at the hospital, showed bilateral tubo-ovarian masses of 5 into 5 and 3 into 4 centimeters. Chest X-ray done was normal. Sputum test for TB was negative, but the patient was started on ATT on clinical suspicion of tubercular etiology. Right-sided discharge resolved, but the left-sided discharge was persistent. She was then referred to higher center for further management. She had regular cycles since Minaki. She has previous 3 full-term deliveries. Last was done 5 years back with ligation. Post-operative period was uneventful in all 3 cesareans. She had non-vegetarian diet, normal bowel bladder habit, and normal sleep-wake cycle. Her general physical examination and systemic examination was normal. On per abdomen examination, she has left and right infraumbilical paramedian cesarean scars with puckered surface. A small healed sinus was present in the right inguinal region with no active discharge. Active sinus was present on left inguinal region. This is the image showing active discharge from the left inguinal region, cesarean scars, and a healed sinus scar on the right side. Per speculum examination was normal. On bimanual examination, uterus was anteverted, normal size with restricted mobility. In right fornix, a cystic mass of 3 into 4 centimeters was felt, which was non-tender. In left fornix, a cystic mass of 5 into 5 centimeters was felt, which was non-tender. On pressing the mass on left side, a serious discharge was seen coming through the sinus. The rectal examination was normal. Her routine investigations, including ESR, chest X-ray, and sputum for AFB, was normal. In specific investigations, discharge was sent for culture, TB-PCR, CBNAT showed negative results. Biopsy from sinus tract was also sent for histopathology, TB-PCR, and CBNAT showed no malignant cells or any feature suggestive of tuberculosis. Endometrial biopsy was sent for histopathology and TB-PCR. It showed proliferative endometrium, no malignant cells, or any granulomatous tissue suggestive of TB. This is the image of contrast-enhanced computed tomography in axial view, showing well-defined lobulated heterogeneously hyperdense masses in bilateral adnexa. In the left side, it is seen as 5 into 4.8 centimeter. On right side, it was 5.6 into 3.9 centimeters, suggestive of bilateral pyosalpines. This is the image of CT sinogram in sagittal axial view, which was done using non-ionic iodinated contrast agent inserted to the point active sinus. This is the point of insertion, showing linear irregular tract of approximately 9 centimeters extending from the skin to the right adnexa. This is the left tubo-ovarian mass. Our provisional diagnosis is bilateral tubo-ovarian mass with left communicating sinus. We ruled out various possibilities by doing investigations. Our differential diagnosis included tuberculosis, syphilitic gammata, mycetoma, actinomycetoma, eumycetoma, cutaneous cryptococcosis, inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's disease, gynecological causes like endometriosis and PID, post-surgery complication, for example, following cesarean section, Rarely, malignancy and post-radiotherapy can also lead to discharging sinus. Surgical and dermatological opinion was taken, but no definitive cause was found. So a decision for exploratory laparotomy was taken. In part of finding, we found a left-sided tubo-variant mass of 5 to 5 centimeters adherent to the opening of deep inguinal ring. On probing the fistula with infant-feeding tube, it followed the path of inguinal canal and was seen coming out at the opening of deep inguinal ring. Right-sided tubo-variant mass of 3 to 4 centimeters was seen. Bilateral tubes and ovaries could not be separately delineated from tubo-variant masses. The uterus was of normal size. This is the image showing a right tubo-variant mass and this is a left tubo-variant mass. This is the images showing excision of fistulous tract. Here is the infant-feeding tube which is inserted from the skin end from outside. It traverses the inguinal fistula and coming out from inside. This is the tube coming out from inside. These are the images showing excision of the fistulous tract. This is the image of specimen of excised fistulous tract, and this is the uterus with the cervix. We did total abdominal hysterectomy with resection of bilateral tubo-variant masses with excision of fistulous tract. The fistula was removed by a separate incision of left inguinal region. The postoperative period was uneventful. This is the image of histopathological image of lumen, showing lumen of left fallopian tube, showing dense lymphoplasmacytic to histocytic aggregates with well-defined granulomas. These are the granulomas. Connective tissue showed lymphocytic aggregates. These are the lymphocytic aggregates. There was no any evidence of malignancy, and the picture was suggestive of granulomatous salpingitis. Rest of the histopathological report was normal. In follow-up, the patient was started on ATT, and her left-sided sinus was completely healed as shown in this figure. Now I will hand over, invite Dr. Anju Mehra for the discussion.
Good evening. Fistula is an abnormal communication connecting two hollow organs or connecting a hollow organ with skin or mucous membrane. We as a gynecologist are more familiar with vesicovaginal fistula, uterovaginal fistula, and rectovaginal fistulas. And even cases of uterocutaneous fistulas are reported. But fistula between a fallopian tube and skin is extremely rare. Causes of chronic discharging sinuses can be dermatological, surgical, or gynecological, as we have already discussed. Female genital TB is a chronic disease with low-grade symptoms, and fallopian tubes are affected in almost 90 to 95% of cases, and the involvement is usually bilateral. Prevalence is difficult to establish statistically as it is always underreported due to asymptomatic cases, paucibacillary nature, and lack of reliable confirmatory investigation. There is no single diagnostic test available to confirm the diagnosis. A high degree of clinical suspicion, elaborate history taking, detailed systemic examination with a battery of tests to document tubercular bacilli and its associated changes may help. Ultrasound, CECT, and MRI are helpful for diagnosing structural changes such as hydrosalpinx and pyosalpinx. CT sinogram is the preferred investigation in cases of chronic sinuses to get exact information about the tract of fistula. The treatment depends upon the age and fertility options of the women. Medical management with ATT is the mainstay of treatment in female genital tuberculosis, but sometimes the response could be slow or paradoxical with the development of abscesses, pyosalpinx, and sinuses. Studies have reported that the penetration of ATT is very poor in cases of cold abscesses and pyosalpinx, and here comes the role of surgical removal. Current studies advocate excision of fistulous tract along with the salpingectomy or salpingo-oophorectomy as the definitive management in these cases. The literature is very limited in case of tubercutaneous fistula, and there are no standard guidelines and treatment available. So there are only case reports reported, and in the last 20 years, there were 6 case reports of tubercutaneous fistula, in which 2 cases were as complication of pelvic inflammatory disease, 1 case was secondary to pelvic endometriosis, and 3 cases were secondary to post-surgery complications such as cesarean and cesarean hysterectomy. In all of the 6 cases, right, treatment done was excision of the fistulous tract with salpingectomy, and there was no recurrence in any of these reported cases. So the take-home message is though a very rare entity, tuberculous pulsalpings forming a tubercutaneous fistula should be kept in mind in cases of chronic discharging pelvic sinuses, salpingectomy, resection of fistulous tract, and treating the underlying cause is the treatment of choice in such cases. Early suspicion, timely detection of the disease, and appropriate treatment prevent long-term morbidity and complication in these patients. Thank you. And now I would like to invite Professor Dr. Renuka Malik for the question answer session.
Dr. Renuka, you need to unmute yourself. Just unmute yourself.
Yeah. Now, am I audible?
Yes,
Fine.
yes.
We have two questions in the question and answer section. One is from Dr. Priyanka, who wants to know what were the ultrasound findings done in the vulval flaresis case. So I think, Dr. Priyanka, I'll answer this. We did a pre-op ultrasound Doppler for the patient because we were worried about the vascularity, how much we would encounter. So we were relieved to find it was not very vascular tumor, and the ultrasound just was not very informative. It was just showed a solid structure below. And the second question is, why is thoracic endometriosis common on the right side? I think Dr. Alka, you will take this question.
Yes. There are several theories how it reaches thorax in the first place. So one of them is that the endometrial cells that are shed in the pelvic cavity, they travel up along the currents of the peritoneal fluid, and through the fenestrations of diaphragm, they reach the pleural cavity. That is why it is more common on the right side. Then the falciparum ligament, it stops it going from towards the left side of the abdomen. Our case was also on the right side, and it's 9 times more common on the right side than the left.
I think judges can ask questions if they
Yeah,
want.
I will welcome
Dr.
experts.
Mala,
when-
Dr. Anjali here. I wanted to ask third case, Dr. Anjum. Was she given ATT? I missed that part. Was she given ATT? Just track excision was done.
Ma'am, she had a history that she was given ATT 1 year back in district hospital on high degree of clinical suspicion of the sinuses when she had bilateral sinuses. And after taking 6 months of ATT, right-sided sinuses had resolved, whereas the left side sinus was persisting. And at that point, she was referred from there to the higher centers for the further management. She had a history.
No,
Okay.
so you she advised the medicine people to give another course of ATT.
Ma'am, we tried to do all the tests for documenting tuberculosis. We sent the discharge for culture, histopathology, CBNAT. Even the sinus tract was sent. Endometrial biopsy was sent for all the investigations. But we could not find any evidence of tuberculosis prior to our surgery. So under the combined decision with the surgeons and gynecologists, we decided to operate the masses, to take out the masses.
No, after the surgery, did you give her ATT? I mean, was the finally?
Yes, sir. We have started her on ATT. As on the histopathology, there were findings suggestive of granulomatous salpingitis.
Yes, that is what I wanted to say. That
we plan to give for 9 months,
Yes.
Considering it to be a chronic case.
Yeah, must be given. She must.
Yes. Was it the first line, Indu? Or the same course was given, or it was changed? Because despite the fact she received it and still she had this tract which is not resolved.
Yeah, so she should be even longer,
Drugs
9
were
months.
same, or
a second line therapy and for a longer duration.
Yeah, second line has to be. Yeah.
And ideally, we should try to rule out MDR also if possible.
Yes,
but you didn't grow the on culture, then it's difficult. But nice case.
Well, my question is for the young presenters, the very juniors who presented. And all the 3 cases were very good, extremely rare. The elephantiasis 1%, and the thoracic endometriosis that was, and the tuberovarian tubercutaneous. All of them were very good, very well presented by the juniors, and very well explained by the senior doctors of RML, first of all. Then I
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
like to
Renuka,
ask,
I have
the
a,
young ones, the first case, as regards the first case, you thought of elephantiasis since she came from Bihar and she had no other pointers to this thing. You thought of Bancrofti or the filariasis kind of etiology to that. Then the next etiology you thought of tuberculosis also. These two were very, you were not able to detect them. And on the basis of the presentation, the age and factor and all, you treated her for this thing and this thing. So, but are there any other causes like lymphogranuloma venereum? How did you rule out that? I have seen cases of lymphogranuloma venereum. Very rare to find elephantiasis of vulva in clinical practice. I have seen 1 or 2 cases. But how do you rule out lymphogranuloma venereum?
I think Dr. Neha, you take this question. Dr. Neha.
And what is the significance of finding elephantiasis in young women? Are we just concerned about elephantiasis as such?
First of all, in our case, she was a resident of Bihar and particularly Madhubani district.
Yes, I fully understood.
Secondly,
the districts known for elephantiasis.
Right. For the lymphogranuloma venereum, usually presents with enlarged lymph nodes along with ulcers. Our patient did not have any history of lymphadenopathy. And we had also got a dermatological opinion regarding the same to rule out STDs. So it was ruled out that ways also. Otherwise, if we have to do a definitive test, we have a nucleic acid amplification test which can be done to detect that. And if there are discharging ulcers and sinuses, we can take a swab. So in donovenosis, donovan bodies can be seen on these slides. And this is the diagnosis for, but in our case, we did not have any ulcers, any discharging sinuses. It was only the skin which was very thickened and enlarged. So in, we reviewed the literature.
Ulcers will come in the very initial stages.
Initial stages.
It is only later on that you find the secondary stages.
Yes, but ma'am, these tests also, they say
elephantiasis.
Yes, initial stages only we can
Yeah, Neha, another question.
And that is there. So your examination was okay, but you should have added some points on the sexually transmitted infection also in the history, in the husband, and colorectal examination that was not mentioned in your clinical history. So I thought
that was done.
You should
that was missed, but we have taken a complete history from both the parties.
For all STD diseases must be done, and HIV. All these are also important part of a clinical workup of with lymphedema of vulva. So the second case was of a thoracic endometriosis, and that was also a presentation. And, what are the evidences that it is endometriosis?
Evidence of endometriosis.
No, how did you think of thoracic endometriosis? First of all, in the clinical, from the clinical examination and find, what were the points in favor? This is again for the young presenter only, not for the seniors.
Okay, okay.
Dr. Abha.
Dr. I would ask this. It's not easy to identify this.
Very, very rare. But if it is a young patient with history suggesting pelvic endometriosis, and they have symptoms at the time of menses, that is the strong evidence in favor of clinical diagnosis of thoracic endometriosis, especially if they present with pneumothorax or hemothorax or hemoptysis or a diaphragmatic pain on to shoulders. So these are the 4 areas where the thoracic endometriosis can happen. Very, very rare, but only with a good clinical history and examination, and that you come across to diagnose these cases clinically. Of course, you have got MRI, CT scan, everything, and thoracoscopy, nodular biopsy, and all those things. And so then you diagnose them very clearly. But everything is important thing is to take a very good, complete clinical history and examination that I wanted to stress. Third case was very, very nice. Again, cutaneous tuberculous fistula. It is to be suspected in case of bilateral tumor masses, and tubercular etiology is very, very common in our country, and one can suspect them, especially with the 3 previous cesarean in that case, and anti-tubercular treatment followed by complete. How do you treat them once they have got both the ovaries removed and the uterus removed? We have very young patients. How do you are going to manage your afterwards surgical menopause? What should be the follow-up of these women when they have removed your ovaries, tubes, and the uterus? And these patients will have lots of psychological impact of that, and also you get your menopause legs in all these cases which were there in your review of literature. They were very young patients, and some of them had only salpingectomy or salpingophorectomy. Others had total removal of the uterus and bilateral. How do you manage them post surgically? How do you follow them up? Is it important to you?
Yes, ma'am. We have a dedicated HRT clinic.
Very good. So they are the ones who have to have a long-term follow-up for surgical.
Yeah, we take care of their
ovaries
surgical menopause symptoms and their bone health.
Prepare a long-term follow-up. That's what I want to emphasize. Thank you so much.
But I agree with you, Dr. Chitra. Many times, I think if we are suspecting tuberculosis, I think Dr. Anjali and they will remember we did a case, but it was a case of RVF because of tuberculosis. So we gave her full ATT course and wanted to repair the fistula, but it healed of its own. So quite often, if they are actually tuberculosis cases and you give them ATT, so many times fistula heal of their own and they may not require surgery, which is quite difficult also to do. So well taken.
So while we are on the subject of TB, I just wanted to share our experience at UCMS. Like the very first case that was presented due to filariasis, we had that due to tuberculosis. It was a secondary pelvic lymphangiectasia, and that resulted in, the dilated lymphatics in the vulval area. And this was a pregnant lady who had, presented with these kind of vesicular, lesions on the vulva. And she had a cesarean delivery, and then in the next pregnancy she conceived again, and again she had the same sort of a thing. So I think one of the differential diagnoses in the filaria, the first case, because we know it could be a primary or a congenital circumscriptum, or it could be secondary lymphangiectasia, secondary to tubercular lymphadenitis. So I just wanted to share that experience and a differential diagnosis to that case.
We also at AIIMS had a giant vulvar tumor because of TB.
Neha, I have a question for first case, Neha. Yeah, I didn't, sorry, I was driving. I logged in a little late. So in this patient, how did you rule out other diseases? Like you said, the dermatologist has seen her. Did it do a scrape cytology or did they do an FNAC? How did they rule out?
They used for a scrape cytology as there was no ulcerant discharging sinuses. So on the look of it, they said that it is not LGV and donovenosis, and the tissue was sent for histopathological examination.
No. Prior to your diagnosis of
they did not ask us. No,
and another thing is, did you also get an HPV testing done for her? Because sometimes you will have this, big lesions on the vulva. Did you do that for her?
Yes, we have to get an HPV testing to rule out condylomicrominata because it is very similar appearance, although the warty appearance it is, and it's
sometimes they coalesce together and they give an appearance like that.
Appearance, yes. So that has to be definitely an HPV has to be done for the patient, such patients to rule out condylomicrominata.
Another question related to the last case. So you said that she had a tubo-ovarian masses. So is it possible that, I think Dr. Chitra also pointed out, they are very young patients. Could we have only removed the tube, which is forming a fistula, and excised and left the ovaries, whatever little one could save, so that she would have, yes, Anjum, all my old
All your own Julius.
Yeah. So could you have left some part of the ovary? Because in any case, you were supposed to give her ATT
Ma'am,
afterwards so
actually-
that she would be having natural estrogens.
Ma'am, in the PEROP findings, both the tubes and ovaries, they were forming, on both the sides, they were forming complex tube ovarian masses, and it was very difficult to separate this. There was no demarcation between the tube and ovary present. Had it been there, the treatment described is only self-injecting. We could have saved the ovary, but that possibility was not there.
That is what we should convey to the people, that you should be very, very conservative in removing the ovaries in a young woman. It's not easy to take an HRT for years together. I mean, estrogens definitely for this patient. Have you told her to take ATT now? Sorry, HRT.
Ma'am, in her pre-op counseling, we did explain and gave her the option regarding treatments. I mean, this we also told her about the HRT. We gave her an option for HRT.
And one take-home message is, if this was diagnosed a little bit early and she could have got a complete anti-tubercular treatment,
exactly,
she won't go to.
She must have, the sinus must have been healed.
So you should always have a high index of
degree of clinical
in fistulas.
Yeah.
Another question to Neha. Sorry, Neha, I'm calling you again. That in a case, because you had given that your first case, that elephant cases, that you had given her treatment, are there reported cases where they can be only treated by medical management and they resolve?
Which case? The filariasis, ma'am?
Yeah, your case.
When they reach the stage of elephantiasis, then they cannot be managed by medical management.
So it has to be combined.
Yes, it has to be a combined treatment, and excision is the only way by which he can be treated.
It's not like tuberculosis, which will melt away. Like in tuberculosis.
In tuberculosis, also the case reports I had gone through, they say when they reach the stage of elephantiasis, they also need ATT along with excision. Because when the lymphatics have been damaged and we see such gross cases, they cannot resolve only by medical management.
But notoriously, they are very, very difficult to treat because of the dilated lymphatic vessels. It goes on, it is so wet and it goes on leaking. So one has to really take a conscious decision that you want to undertake surgery. I wonder what is the kind of treatment that people have for the enlarged, the filariasis when it affects the lower limbs and all that. So
also depends on the grades, the grading. Basically, the grade 1 is the pitting edema. In those cases, the garments can be used, compression stockings can be used, elevation of the limb.
So do they also
can be done? But again, in the gross cases, they just have to keep the skin clean, because in those cases, resection is usually not done.
You cannot do anything there.
Yes.
Because it's difficult for them to walk with such a huge growth on a wall. So definitely it will. That's why I thought you have reviewed it. You must be knowing. Maybe yes, when they reach to this size, the excision is the answer.
Yes.
Active infection is over by this time, actually. This is the way of the infection.
Because the infection usually happens in the childhood and they present in the adulthood after around like 8 to 15 years. By that time, the adult worms are also dead, and even the microfilariae are not present in the blood.
So what has been the duration of follow-up of this patient of filariasis?
The patient is doing good. We have not seen recurrence. She just had one follow-up because then she went back to her state Bihar. So we could not telephonically, we had inquired. She is comfortable and she has not had any recurrence till now.
And that is how long? What has been the duration?
2020 we had operated. So it's been around
last year.
Nice cases. Congratulations, Ashok.
I had one question, Ashok, before you wind up. This thoracic endometriosis, how do you diagnose? You had a histopathology or a pleural biopsy? What I did not understand exactly. It was a parenchymal disease or a pleural disease or what?
I mean, it can be parenchymal, pleural, or diaphragmatic, or four can be involved. Any of them, or more than one of them.
No, Alka, person had a breathlessness as a symptom. So how did they think of endometriosis? Because there was no gynecological disorder till then. That is what the presentation was. I don't know. The presentation was that primarily the patient had a breathlessness. So how did you come to this diagnosis? It was histopathology
For
from
breathlessness, X-ray chest showed pneumohydrothorax. When the tapping was done, it was blood-stained. Because it was blood-stained, she underwent thoracoscopy. And on thoracoscopy, the lesions and fibrosis were seen. And on the biopsy, it showed hemosiderin-laden macrophages. So that is how it led to endometriosis.
Okay, so it
And
was
also
a thoracoscopy and a parenchymal biopsy, right?
pleural biopsy of the lesion, pleural biopsy of the lesion, of the adhesion as well as the yellow and red spots.
Okay.
I think we can wind off now. Thank you, everybody.
Madam, Dr. Kamal Bakshi wants to say something. We can. Madam, please unmute. Madam, please unmute.
Madam ko, otherwise.
Yes, madam.
Unmute. Am I audible now?
Yes, madam.
Yes.
See, I would congratulate Dr. Ashok Kumar and the whole team for the
Yes.
excellent presentations. And I agree with all the senior colleagues, that as far as the first case was concerned, was very interesting, and it is very difficult as far as the patient is concerned. But what was surprising was that she developed first case, the second case and the third case where the ovaries have been removed and the uterus have been removed, if we could have avoided, or though the presenter said that the line of demarcation was difficult, but I think if you get a case again, it is much better that gradually you are able to demarcate and you are able to save the ovaries. It is well said that they are attending the HRT clinic. That is the most difficult part. I have seen patients coming for about 30 to 40 years. So one is the expense, second is the time of the family, third is the quality of life. The painstaking operation gives a much better results, but I would say on the whole, beautiful management and a wonderful treat, and congratulations to the RMLT for taking up such a lovely challenge and presenting unique cases. Congratulations.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much.
Renuka, I would just want to add one thing. Renuka?
Yeah,
Hello?
yeah, Dr. Veena.
Yeah,
I can hear.
Excellent insight into all the three cases, especially this Dr. Alka's case. I was also there in the initial workup of the case. It was her insight into the case which led to the diagnosis, because most of these cases of rare cases, which has been aptly theme of the today's clinical meeting, the management dilemma. Because most of them are so rare occurrence that they kind of don't have much literature on them. But she was into that case, and the presentation is always by ruling out other differentials, especially in elephantiasis. You never get they are such presentation is so late. They get to have no filaria would be seen either in tissue or in the peripheral blood. So they are always, clinical exclusion diagnosis, which, brings the treatment part into it. So it is excellent presentation, and congratulations to Dr. Ashok and everybody at RML. So proud.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. And I think with Dr. Mala, Srivastava permission, President AOGD, we can close. Yes. Thank you very much for all your advice.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Ashok, for concluding remarks. And now it is time to say thanks to everyone. All the three cases were very rare and very well presented by all the presenters. Case of bilateral large vulval elephantiasis by Dr. Manmeet, Dr. Neha Pruthi, and case of thoracic endometriosis syndrome by Dr. Abha Kiran and Dr. Alka Goel, and cutaneous fistula by Dr. Parithi Gupta and Dr. Anjum Ara. Excellent presentations, and I'm very thankful to the esteemed judges, Dr. Chitra, Dr. Anjali, Dr. Radhika, and Dr. Vijay Joshi for their valuable inputs and time, as well as thanks to the whole team of Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute and RML Hospital for the very nicely conducted meeting. And at the end, thanks to Jackson Pal for providing backend support, and to Dr. Deepika Chhabra and the associate colleague. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you very much,
Thank
ma'am.
you, Dr. Mamta. Thank you, everyone.